Today's lesson is on the percent equation. And so today's I can statement is I can apply the percent equation to problems using mental math. Some of these we might need to use a calculator for, and that's okay. So first I need you guys to take a few minutes to complete the table below for your warm-up. You're converting fractions, decimals, and percents, just like we've done the last couple days. So pause the video, take a few minutes to complete this, and then come back and check your work. So if we look for answers, we're starting with the decimal 345 thousandths. So as a fraction, one option would be to write 345 thousandths. And we could also make it into percent by moving our decimal over 2, which we get 34.5%. So another option for our fraction, if we don't want to put it over thousandths, is to use our percent of 34.5 and put it over 100, since percents always go over 100. The second row has 246%. So because it's a percent, we know it could go over 100, so I could say 246 over 100. And we can also change it into decimal by moving our point to left. And we end up making the decimal 2.46%, or 2.46. And so that decimal has another way we could put it as a fraction. We could say 2 and 46 hundredths. So we could come up with the fraction 2 and 46 hundredths. Either fraction would be totally fine. And last but not least, we're given a fraction 8 tenths. Well, 8 tenths, I know what my decimal would be. It'd be 0.8, because that's 8 tenths. And as a percent, I move this decimal over 2, and I end up with 8, and then the second loop becomes a 0, and I get 80%. And if we look at 8 tenths, we could put it over 100 to make sure we really should have 80%. And I know that 10 times 10 is 100, so 8 times 10, it gives me 80. So I know I have my 80% right, as well as my decimal of 0.8. Continuing with our warm-up, we have to make sure we're really, really good at making percents into decimals. So we have a quick review here. We need to write 52% as a decimal. So remember, if we're looking at the number 52, currently our decimal is sitting at the end. To turn it into a decimal from a percent, we go 2 units to the left. So I move it once, twice, and it becomes 0.52, or 52 hundredths. 7%, there's my decimal. If I move it over 2, I then get 0.07, or 7 100ths. And 34.5. I currently have a decimal here. If I move it over 2, I end up with 0.345 as my decimal, or 345 thousandths. Remember, when you're going percent to decimal, make a quick note, percent to decimal, we go 2 units left, okay? That's how we're going to be moving our decimal in those percents to make it a decimal for what we need today. So to start us off, we need to know our percent equation. And here we have it in big bold letters. Part equals the percent times the whole amount. Okay? And we have to keep a couple keywords to be looking for. When we are seeing the part, the keyword we're looking for is. So we're going to put that in our first box. When we are finding the number that represents the whole amount, the keyword is going to be of. Those are some words we want to pull out of our problem so we know which number correlates to the part and which number is going to correlate to the whole. We also need to be hyper aware of that when we're working with the percent, we need to change, so need to change the percent into a decimal. Okay? If you don't change the percent into a decimal, your number is not going to be correct. So make sure you're very conscious of this today as we go through the problems. Our equation is part equals percent times whole. We have a couple key words to be looking for, is and of. And when you're using your percent, you change it into a decimal before it goes in the equation. So here's our first example as we're finding the part, okay? So at the top of my page, I'm going to write down our percent equation, which is part equals percent times whole. And that's what we're relying on today. My first problem states, what number is 50% more than 40? So, what number is my question, okay? And then I see 50% more than 40. 40 is my whole in this case. 50% is clearly my percent. And then what number is going to be my part? So if I was going to put this into the equation, I have part equals, and I don't know it, so I'm leaving it as P, percent. Now 50% as a decimal is going to be 0.50. That's the number that goes in my equation. So I have 0.50 times the whole. In this case, my whole is 40. When we multiply, 50% or half of 40 gives me 20. Try to do this mentally, but if you can't, you may use a calculator. Now it says, what number is that much more than 40? So we actually have to take this a next step. And our last step is we're going to take 40 and we're going to add to it what we found. And we get our answer of 60. So it's really saying 60 is 50% more than 40. The problem on the bottom is very similar if you can give it a try. Pause the video, give it a try, and then come back and check your work. So, if I'm going to be annotating what number, I know that's my part that I'm trying to find. 200 is my percent, and 20 is the whole amount. So in my percent equation, I have my part, which is unknown, 200%, but remember we're changing it to a decimal. So I move my decimal over and I get 2.00, which is just 2, times my whole, which is 20, and we can actually do this in our head. 2 times 20 is 40. But because of these words more than, we have to add. So I'm going to have to add what I started with plus what I found, and we actually get 60 once again. So 60 is 200% more than 20. Now, rather than having the part be missing, now our percent is missing. So on top, I'm going to put my equation again. Part equals percent times whole. And notice I'm abbreviating, which is fine. So we have 15 is, that's a key word, what percent of 60? So remember, 2 slides ago, I said is our key word for the part, and of is the key word for the whole. Because those words are near the problems or the numbers, I can correlate which is the part, which is the whole. So if I was setting up this equation, 15 is my part, so I put 15 equals what percent? That's my unknown, so I'm going to leave it as maybe, what symbol should we use? We'll use a Y for percent. You can choose any letter, or you could leave the percent symbol, times the whole. Our whole was 60. And now notice we have a problem we need to solve. how do we undo multiplying? Well, we're going to divide. So I divide by 60 on both sides. And when we put this in a calculator, we get y equals 0.25. Now that's our percent piece. But remember, percents change to decimals when we were solving. So this is in decimal form. And I need to change it to a percent. So I'm going to move my decimal over 2 to the right to make it a bigger number. And I end up with 25%. Don't forget to go that last step of changing the y, or the unknown percent, from a decimal back to percent. Here's another problem for us to try. It says 50 is, that's my key word, what percent of 85? It's the same as the last one. 50 is my part, my percent's my unknown, and then 85 is my whole. So if I write my equation, I have 50 equals y times 85. When I go ahead and solve to undo the multiplying, I'm going to divide both sides by 85. In doing so, I end up with y equals about 0.588. It's not a very nice decimal, but it is what it is. And it repeats, but I'm just going to cut it off there. But remember I said we have to change our decimal into a percent. So I'm going to move that decimal over 2, and I end up with 58.8% as my answer. Last but not least, this time the whole is missing. So on top, once again, my equation is part equals percent times whole. It says 5 is, that's a key word, 15% of what number? So is my part, that's my percent, obviously the 15, and then of what number, that's the whole, and that's what I'm missing. So if I plug this into my equation, I have 5 equals, now remember 15% as a decimal is 0.15, so 0.15 times the whole that I do not know. And when I solve to undo the multiplying, I have to divide both sides by 0.15, and the whole equals 33.3 repeating. And I have my answer. So 5 is 15% of 33.3. And last but not least, 45 is, keyword, 95% of what number? So 45 is the part, 95 is my percent, and of what number is the whole? And so if I put this in my equation, I have 45 equals, 95% as a decimal is 0.95, so 0.95 times W. To solve, we're going to divide by 0.95 on both sides. And when we do so, we get W equals 47.37, give or take. It's a decimal, so I had to round it, but that's okay. So 45 is 95% of 47.37. Last but not least, there's a few to practice on your own. Pause the video, give yourself a few minutes, and then come back and check your work. So looking at our answers, numbers 1 and number 2 were like our first problems we did. And the answer for number 1 was 2, and the answer for number 2 was 60. We were finding the part. For numbers 3 and 4, we're finding our percent. 3 ends up being 0.5%, or a half of a percent. And 4 is 90%. And numbers 5 and 6 were like the third problems we did. And we were finding the whole. Number 5 was 10, and number 6 was 500.